So the good news and the bad news. Good news, last session of the day. Bad news, I'm sorry, it's got to be delivered by me. So please allow myself to introduce myself. I'm Andy Stewart. I'm the Manager of Land and Spatial Information State Imagery Team. I've been working in the remote sensing and imagery industry within Queensland Government for nearly 20 years now, across various roles, including that of a remote sensing scientist, formerly with the pre-incarnations of the Remote Sensing Centre, and then most recently enjoying my time with Land and Spatial Information, moonlighting in other roles, including the G20 Globe and other fun and games. So today I'm going to talk to you about GEOINT, but first in 3 short slides I'm going to help you understand why as public servants it should matter to you. See, one of the most long-standing global measures of trust is showing an ongoing decline in trust Australians have across all 3 tiers of government. While not assisted in recent times by our federal government instability and the indiscretions of other major institutions, public trust is fundamentally important in ensuring the success of government programs. The good news is that through a greater commitment to integrity, transparency and proper process, trust can be restored. Openness of government, transparency around decisions and the management of information are all key drivers of public trust. And sitting behind all of these is the notion of being a data-driven government, where the role of data in decision-making is now more important than ever. In terms of decision-making, the DIKW model isn't new, but it's still very apt. It supports that decision makers are normally far away from the data on the value chain and are more interested in information or knowledge. The brain processes visuals 60,000 times faster than it does text. We are wired to take in visual content faster and more effectively than we are words, and we shouldn't think of our decision makers to be any different. If we are to rise above the status quo, we need to create an environment of innovation and creativity in transitioning from data, information and knowledge, and provide tools that provide access to that knowledge. Innovation in creating data, in visualisation tools and in using data is most needed. And today, through GEOINT, I'm going to inspire you across 2 of these. All right, that clicked up, that made sense, very good. So, GEOINT itself isn't a new term. It's been in existence since the early 2000s with the formation of the United States National Geospatial Agency, or the NGA. And it's been used even locally in many security and law enforcements, certainly in Australia for a considerable time. It's effectively, essentially, intelligence derived from the exploitation and analysis of imagery and geospatial information about features and events with reference to location and time. And it's those key points in there about location and time, which is why imagery in this process is an absolute and critical enabler. So what has changed in recent times, though, stemming from our security industry, security and defence industries, is the availability of high-resolution satellite imagery to the masses. Now, this hasn't gone unnoticed by quantitative hedge funds, and all of them are seeking to gain that crucial information advantage to generate alpha or intel with regards to global investment decisions. So I challenge you, why can't civilian government leverage this data opportunity as well? So the rest of my presentation today will cover techniques and opportunities using planet data in this regard. And I'm going to kick off with that, with a little bit of a traditional approach of visual interpretation of imagery, which, while more manual in its routings, is still as critical as ever from a machine learning based approach of our future, where in the first instance you need to train many of those algorithms with this kind of information. So first of all, tone. So tone refers to the relative brightness of colour or objects in an image. Tone can indicate changes in vegetation health and is a fundamental element for distinguishing between different types of targets or features. A tonal change, for example, in the image up here, such as this field, where it's dark green and it starts to get a bit mottled, can indicate everything from the presence of inadequate fertilisers, different growing conditions going on, the introduction of pests or otherwise. So from changes within an object of tone and tone relative to other objects, you can get a bit of a gauge of what's going on and what a feature might be. The next factor is shape, and that's the general form, structure or outline of individual objects. Should be pretty straightforward. Over on the bottom left-hand side, shape that looks like an aircraft, probably an aircraft. Top right, shape that looks like a commercial liner, looks as such. But within here, you can also get a bit of a gauge for the difference between natural and man-made features, where natural features typically in shapes have got more coarse or irregular shaped edges versus natural ones which are more linear and integral in their component. Next one is size. So size of objects in an image is a function of scale, and it's important to assess the size of a target feature relative to other objects in a scene, as well as the absolute size, and to aid in interpretation of that target. And the good example here is in Cairns, where you've got your larger downtown commercial buildings of a considerable scale moving through into the residential areas. Now, without other information available, you could undertake a bit of preliminary analysis to sort of say, well, the size of one of those residential houses might be about 20 metres by 20 metres, conservatively. That will give you an indication for sort of some of the other sort of scaled items that you're looking at an image at any point in time. Next up, we've got pattern, and pattern refers to the spatial arrangement of visibly discernible objects and the orderly repetition of those. And in this example here, we've got a solar farm, which again has got a sort of fairly consistent and linear man-made pattern to it. But in the separation between individual solar panels, you're getting sort of that sort of model look of the background ground cover patterns in the landscape coming through in that feature. Understanding those kind of things can help you, again, to put further context into what you're looking at. Texture refers to the arrangement of tonal variation in particular areas of an image. So we've got areas of native forest and forestry here shown, and where you've got your sort of more sort of forestry regions, the vegetation cover is more homogeneous, and you're getting that sort of smooth texture applied to the image. Likewise, in your native vegetation regions, the surface is more rough and more irregular. Also, the example is many of the cropping areas up there in the top left as well too. Now, shadow can be both helpful in providing an idea of the profile or relative height of a target, but it can also reduce or limit interpretation of features from shaded areas. So that one can swing it both ways. And finally, association. And this takes into account the relationship between other recognisable objects or features in proximity to the target of interest. The perfect example here is the island on the left-hand side. I'm not quite sure, running down the spine of that, whether that's a golf course from this sort of scale and resolution of image, but the fact that it's sitting next to a major resort, again, by association, indicates to me that there's a high likelihood as to what that feature is in interpretation. So again, they're sort of the 7 sort of basic elements of visual interpretation. I apologise for the more hardcore remote sensing people in the audience, but we do have a mix of people today, and it's important to understand in your day-to-day activities what tools are available to you in this regard. So moving then onto time series patterns, and a time series is a collection of well-defined data items obtained through repeated measurements over time. So we can have a trend time series pattern where we've got a long-term direction in what's going on, and we're seeing here at sort of Springfield the development extension over time in that location. A time series can have a seasonal pattern, which is systemic, calendar-related movements. So up north of Proserpine, we've got our cane farms that are harvested on a yearly basis up there as the landscape changes. And then finally, we can have irregular and unsystematic short-term fluctuations that go on in a time series. And this is an example up near Yeppoon of the artificial wave facility that's been built up there. So also touching on some really quick sort of 101s of various remote sensing techniques. And this really sort of throws back to what you've been demonstrated and spoken to today with regards to opportunities with multispectral imagery stemming from the electromagnetic spectrum. So in here, each measurement or pixel across, say, all of the 4 bands that planet on its different doves might sort of sense are linked to a numerical value of reflected light for a given location. So they correspond, as we've spoken about today, to 3 metre sort of, or roughly sort of 3 metre components on the ground. So each one of those has got sort of effectively 4 values attached to it. And the beauty of remote sensing and applied remote sensing is that with these values, it's more than just looking at a picture, and you can manipulate these from a numerical sense and mathematically analyse what's going on, as been demonstrated. So at the very basic level, we've got pixel difference from one to the next, where you're getting those changes in numbers. But also today, what's been spoken about a few times is the opportunities of using spectral indices. So these are combinations of spectral reflectance from 2 or more of these bands that indicate the relative abundance of features of interest. So in here we've got NDVI and live vegetation over a location on the Darling Downs. And NDVI can be used over time to then differentiate growth phases and identify different crops as well. So again, it's not just the potential utility of planet imagery in its raw RGB sense from a time series. There's the time series opportunities from the derived products as well too that can be applied. And this is also useful in interpreting fuel load and vegetation change as well too. Other indices that are available are soil moistures, which are derived from the near-infrared and blue bands, and they can be used to discern surface moisture characteristics and look at evapotranspiration characteristics over time as well. All right. Now we start to go in a little bit deep. Different surface features reflect or absorb the sun's electromagnetic radiation in different ways. The reflectance properties of an object depend on the material and its physical and chemical state, and the surface roughness, as well as the geometric or lighting circumstances. So these differences make it possible to identify different Earth surface features or materials by analysing their spectral reflectance signatures. And a great example of this is some of the work that Rodney was undertaking with regards to coral reef mapping. On here, using planet imagery, we can sort of see that across the different spectral bands, there's an approximate signature that's able to be related to the different compositions of bare ground, water, vegetation and buildings. Now, it's when you take those potential signatures to an image and train an algorithm that you can start to derive classifications and classification products from the raw satellite image. And this is sort of your sort of more traditional remote sensing based approach. So in here, we had the previous image of a number of the prawn farms at the mouth of the Logan River that were drained as part of the white spot disease outbreak. We can see at this point in time, by training a classification algorithm, we've created a thematic product that distinguishes the features of interest. And in this case, I wanted to be able to see where there were ponds that had been recently sort of filled with water to understand what was going on at a point in time. If I go back to that previous image, there's a number of ponds there that have water in them. But as Rodney alluded to earlier in his presentation about offshore water, sediment in water changes the spectral signature of a water body. So particularly looking at in this instance for water where there was an increased sedimentation component, gave me that slightly different sort of component that I could then look at and distinguish different features. And likewise, I've been able to map out roughly sugarcane and mangroves. Again, there's a fair bit of noise in this image. This is about probably 10 minutes work in ArcGIS, so it can be achieved in a quick and dirty fashion. From then it can be refined if you're wanting to really work to delineate a product. Now, What was also been spoken about today was that object-based classification, particularly in the last presentation by Planet, and that's that characterisation of pixels based on the spatial relationship with the surrounding pixels. And all of those 7 visual elements that we spoke of earlier are all factors to consider into a process, again, in designing an algorithm such as this. So it's this type of classification attempts to mimic the type of analysis done by humans. So other sources of geo-intelligence data. Really, if you're using a framework of location and time, you have a plethora of opportunities. Earth observation, which was spoken about, we've got the sort of natural plug-in of the Planet Imagery 2, is your sort of first avenue to go to in this regard. And there's been a number of other satellite platforms that have been mentioned today that can help support information in that area. You shouldn't think about only using Planet or only using Sentinel. There's value in aggregating various platforms to achieve various sorts of things. We've got geospatial information that supports that, and up the top there, statistics. Now we're really blessed in Australia with the Australian Statistical Spatial Framework, and that provides sort of consistency, longer-term consistency to the census records over time. That information is vitally important in applying geointelligence data into a civilian sort of government setting. But really, geospatial information can be thought about quite laterally. 80% of data has got some degree of locational component to it. So I would challenge that there would be a significant number of corporate data sets and corporate systems out there that location is a key component of, that can be linked back through into this sort of paradigm of location and time. And then likewise, we've got sort of those live feeds as well too, by the Internet of Things and also georeferenced social media at times with regards to picking up sentiment. So I'll talk now, and this has been touched on sort of a couple of times in the last few presentations, around the opportunity we have to begin to change context for government policy. Once upon a time, we're sort of all about using satellite imagery and that sort of intelligence to look at things as that happened in the past. With the opportunity provided to us with the Planet Imagery, we're able to sort of step a little bit forward into sort of a more timely capacity, where we're able to, in many instances, with that information feed, embark on early intervention in an activity underway, or be notified as well too, as sort of where change is starting to go on. But the real game changer for us and the real opportunity is to step into the predictive analysis component and intelligence automation into the future. And I'll elaborate on just a few examples before I wrap up today in this regard. So with regards to the early intervention paradigm, so here we've got a property out in the Fitzroy Basin back from 2017. A couple of centre pivot irrigators next to a stream. Now in that great flood that was presented early on in the session, one of these sort of farm plots was severely impacted by the floodwaters. Now they receded and they went away. But months after the fact, there's still no activity going on in this field. So, asking questions. What's happened with regards to the landholder and their access to federal government disaster assistance arrangements to get operational again? Has there been circumstances where this event is the last one and it's tipped them over the edge and they're beginning to suffer mental health issues as regards to what's going on, compared to, or when you sort of think about the influence of the drought in many of these locations as well too. So for a little while today, we've been thinking about change and looking for change and looking for change, looking to change and using that trigger. But again, where are we expecting change and change isn't actually happening? Bit of talk today earlier on with our counterpart from New South Wales with regards to looking at irrigation and the behaviour of our landholders in those regards. Now again, this can be used information going on in adjacent fields, as was demonstrated, can be used as a surrogate for water use. But there's also another sort of social element to this sort of information with regards to, what's going on in a certain property compared to the neighbours in that region. Certain circumstances meant that they're a higher risk of compliance breach because they haven't grown crop for a period of time and they're about to turn over. They're left with, in their mind, potentially no choice but to take water illegally in that regard. So likewise, there's an opportunity here for us to also be on the lookout at the same time to look out for agricultural hardship as well too, and instead of waiting for landholders that can sometimes often be sort of proud, to also undertake early intervention in that regard. Next one here up at Abbott Point is looking at the supply chain and what's going on there at a given point in time. So, we can sort of use observations from the time series to be on the lookout for what kind of longer term impacts there might be from natural disasters further away from where the event might have occurred. Sort of likewise, this is also an opportunity to see what's going on in the stockpiles adjacent here. And sort of similar to the case I mentioned earlier with the quantitative hedge funds, are we able to look at again, we can't sort of count the individual lumps of coal in the stockpiles there, but what we can see in this imagery is the locations of the different cranes on a day-to-day basis that are servicing those loads. Yep. So association, other imagery interpretation techniques. Going back and applying some mathematics to the situation, what's the average amount that you would expect a crane to move on a daily basis as related to a sort of certain amount of export activity going on? If you're sort of starting to notice the cranes perhaps not moving as much or moving more, that's starting to give you a bit of a lead indicator for, I guess, sort of economically what might be going on. And this has got considerable importance and ramifications from the state from a royalties-based perspective as well too. And back to this video again. Yes, you have seen it before. So over here in Springfield, we've got this changing environment with regards to development. Now, such is the way that in many instances that information, there can sometimes be a lag through sort of what's going on into other sort of foundation data sets. Typically roads and buildings and all these things actually go up before we actually get a chance to map them in the first instance. So having this kind of information feed gives you an opportunity to undertake sort of better transport, health and education infrastructure modelling with regards to what's going on and planning. And sort of an interesting component and twist up to this is the fact that our census data in Australia is collected every 5 years, but there's an awful lot that goes on in 5 years in between this. Again, what did the statistical local area look like 2 years ago out to the left there? We don't have that data captured in the census, but we do have these feeds of information that can help to input as a surrogate in the interim that we could potentially help to extrapolate out what was actually going on with regards to that. And intelligent automation, it's really that sort of next step, and it's marrying that AI, so that's including the machine learning and machine vision with automation. And really where sort of Planet themselves, I think, are starting to sort of move next. So we're in a world where we've got tech like self-driving cars where, they're being built to analyse and respond to a stream of situation data from sensors going on. And again, there's no reason why satellite imagery can't feed from a government perspective into those sorts of processes as well too. So what we've got here is basically 30-odd mosaics of Queensland. So that's like about a month's worth of Planet data just there. So we're now, getting a long way towards our third year with Planet. We're talking about an incredible amount of data sitting in the time series of the state now that's been captured right back for every single part of Queensland, not just the coastal areas where there's population, but all the way to the border, all the way to the desert. So where we are seeing trends and how do we best place our resources and assets to achieve maximum efficiency, economic impact, and ultimately citizen experience is where we have the opportunity to go next. Thank you. Hi, I'm back again. So just to wrap up for today, a couple of really quick things. First of all, can I ask you kindly, we love to reduce, reuse and recycle. Can you leave your lanyards at the front desk on the way out if you no longer require them? We've had some requests with regards to the presentations today, so that's both the videos and slide packs. And what we're intending out of today is to start to begin this sort of the journey with you all of this sort of QSAT community. So we'll work our hardest to get as much of that content out to you as possible for you to distribute with your peers and colleagues. There will be a survey out tomorrow, and it's only going to take you, I promise, a couple of minutes, 10 short questions. And just to let you know that the results for us are really important because they're going to determine whether or not we run these sessions again, and also help to justify us, continuing with Planet as well too, for that matter. So look, finally, I'd like to just give a shout out and thanks today to all the various presenters, the state imagery team who have been heavily involved behind the scenes in organising the event, such as Amanda and Kira Lee and Pippa. I'd like to thank Franca for taking photographs today, DNRME Comms for filming the presentations, so many more people can enjoy them in the weeks to come. A shout out as well too to our client engagement team members, Mary Pipos, Andrew Hurst and Dirk Van Til for event planning and support. The open data team for their support in managing inquiries, and hopefully the many more we will get. And finally to Steve Jacoby for endorsing the event. So thanks very much, and thanks very much for making today a success. See you tomorrow.